Hi, I'm Jay Nordlinger with the Human Parade. We're in Miami, Florida, Coral Gables to be specific, with Jeb Bush. He was governor of this state for 2 terms, 1999 to 2007. Governor Bush is in an unusual position, or positions. He's the grandson of a senator, the son of a vice president and president, the brother of another president, and talked about as a future president himself. Here's something else unusual about the governor. In addition to being a practicing politician, or at least a once practicing politician, he's a full-blown policy expert in education and in other areas as well. So we're going to talk about a range of issues today, and I look forward to it. Good to see you.
Welcome to Coral Gables.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us. It's hot down here, but beautiful.
That's why we're inside with air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I thought I'd begin by asking you what life is like lately and how you spend your days and weeks. And I think there's some business and some policy advocacy,
yeah,
maybe a little politicking for congressional candidates and so on. What's a week like?
Let's see. Well, this week started out in Miami. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I took off to San Francisco, gave a speech, a joint appearance with Bill Bradley. He from the left, I from the right, talking with a little higher degree of civility perhaps than what goes on in Washington about the challenges that face the country in front of about 1,000 people. Then I flew to...
Who's taller, by the way?
He is. He's shrinking though. He's because he playing basketball.
Are you catching up?
Yeah, I think poor guy. He's you know, he was rode hard and put up wet being in the NBA, I guess. Great guy though, wonderful man. Just can't understand why he's so liberal, but other than that, I really enjoy his company. And then I flew to Boise, got in at midnight. The next morning, I spent most of the day focused on education issues in the state capital of Idaho. Flew to Grand Rapids, where I did a fundraiser for a think tank policy group in Michigan, and then the next morning I was doing a similar kind of work in Michigan on behalf of education reform, and today I'm here in Coral Gables.
Were you less busy as governor, or as busy?
You know, it's different when you, I have a consulting business and a investment advisory business and a speaking business and then this education work. When you're working for other people, which is basically what I do now, it's harder physically because you're having to go see them. When you're governor, basically you have the power to convene, which is a really cool power, by the way.
I bet.
So people had to force, you know, I now recognize how selfish it was of me to require and ask people to go to Tallahassee, Florida. It's not an easy place to get to.
There are term limits here, aren't there, for the
there
governor?
Are, yeah.
2 terms. Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
I've gone back and forth on this issue in my life. I can argue one way and then the other, but it's a good thing, you believe?
I do. A good friend of mine, former Governor John Rowland, got in trouble, went to prison. And now he's out and he's paid his dues and he's living a productive life. The day he went to prison, I called him and told him I was praying for him. And he said, he told me, kind of interesting, he said, "Do you have term limits in Florida?" I was in my 2nd term and I said, "Yeah, we do." So that's good. Nothing good happens in a 3rd term.
Interesting.
And I think you get, you lose the edge and the passion just naturally, you know, over time. And it's time to, you know, it's always time to move on and it's time to let someone else try.
I was thinking earlier today, your father in the 1988 campaign did something charming. He'd talk about his home states. He had this collection of home states. He had Texas, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine. And I remember in one of his appearances he said, "Good to be here in one of my home states," and I hit another one yesterday. And I was thinking, what is Jeb's home state? Are you, I know you're an adoptive Floridian,
yeah.
But did you grow up in Texas or in New England or little of each?
I was born in Midland, Texas, which is about as Texas gets. And at the age of 6, we moved to Houston, and I went to the University of Texas. So I was Texas born, but I'm a Floridian by choice. And most people in this state, because it's a state of constant transition, when you ask where they're from, they'll say they're from Pennsylvania or New York or Columbia or someplace like that. I've tried to tell people they should be proudly saying where they're from. They're from Miami or they're from Tampa, because this is a great place, and we chose to live here in 1980 and have no regrets at all.
I guess there really aren't carpetbagging charges for politicians here, because everyone's new, right? Or
yeah,
so much of the
although I was one of the first non-Florida born governors.
I'd forgotten that. Huh.
I kind of viewed my tenure as a transition to a different Florida. Florida was dominated by native-born, older white males, center-left kind of in their political orientation, that went to the University of Florida typically, went to law school there and dominated political life and like economic life. It's kind of just the old boy network. Sure. Basically, that's what it was. And Florida had emerged as a vibrant, new kind of state with massive population inflows, and a conservative Republican from Miami that speaks Spanish was not like the mold of the Florida politician. So I took that seriously, because I think it's important to, so when I got there, I appointed people of that really reflected the new Florida and the diversity of the state. And I was very proud to work with people that had a shared set of values, but were really a microcosm of the state from every flavor and every walk of life.
You mentioned speaking Spanish. Did I read correctly? Did you go to Mexico as a teenager?
Mm-hmm. I did. I went from high school. I was down there for a couple of months, and I met my wife. Fell in love with her, literally love at first sight. I mean, the expression, it actually happened to me.
Were you 17?
I was 17. Fell madly, just crazy in love, somersault kind of love, and got married, I think 2 weeks after my 21st birthday, and been going pretty strong ever since.
You were, I believe you were a Latin American Studies major in college, which is an unusual major for a conservative or future conservative to have. In my experience, Latin American Studies is dominated by lefties.
Yeah, well, most studies are dominated by lefties if you think about it. So yeah, I think that's probably true. My interest in Latin American Studies was my wife to start with, literally. Sure. I mean, my orientation and alignment in life got refocused thanks to her. So I went, and the University of Texas has an excellent Latin American Studies program, one of the best, if not the best library. All that was kind of secondary to my interest, which was motivated by my beloved wife. So I got out of school in 2 years, so I didn't hang out with a lot of the lefties that you're describing. Yeah. I can vaguely remember those classes. But my interest in Latin America kind of has evolved and gotten deeper and stronger. I worry a bit that we worry about far-off places way too much. We spend billions in places that are so foreign to who we are and either hate us or are unstable enough to quickly hate us. And yet here in our front yard, at least in Miami, we think it's our front yard. We have countries and people who have similar aspirations as us, and we don't try to connect with them at a deeper level.
You are not one of those who believe that the growth of the Hispanic population in America will sink the Republican Party.
Could if we're stupid. If Republicans are club-footed, you could create a generation of voters that feel alienated from the Republican cause. I don't think that's going to happen. And Hispanic voters, by and large, Latino voters, are aspirational. They're not looking to find some line to get into, for a handout. What they want is to pursue their dreams. And I think the appeal of the Republican Party at its best is that it is the aspirational party. When we do it right, we do it really well. When we do it poorly, we look narrow and kind of looking back rather than being optimistic about the future. And the party's kind of at a crossroads right now. So I hope that the Hispanic burgeoning demographic of the Hispanic voter, as it matures and becomes eligible to vote and then starts participating at the typical rates of second and third generation Americans, I hope they feel welcome in our party.
Did you do well here in Florida among Hispanic voters?
I did very well. I
50%-ish or?
70 kind of percentage. I got 60% of the Democrat Hispanic votes and 90% of the Republican Hispanic votes.
Of course, here in Florida, there's the Cuban element more than in other states, and that's not unhelpful to a Republican, correct?
That would be the Republican Hispanic side of the equation in general, and people jokingly refer to me as the first Cuban governor, and I accept that. If Bill Clinton was the first African-American president, I can say
Why not?
I have an incredible respect. I think the Cuban-American community has, by most accounts, you'd have to say, has been one of the most successful immigrant groups in our country's history.
A little memory lane, if you don't mind. Were you always a conservative? Were you allowed to be anything else? Did you ever have a kind of liberal flirtation, or?
Yeah, I did. Not really well thought out, obviously.
Me too.
You know, as a young person, I was kind of rebellious, and I've always been more focused on trying to do it my own way. So by nature, if you're coming from a conservative family, you kind of migrate to doing it your own way means you're not going to do it your parents' way. But my conservative views kind of were solidified in the 1980 campaign, both by working for my dad and then working for then Governor Reagan and my dad.
What did you do?
I quit my job. We were living in Venezuela, and I quit my job to work full-time without pay for about 2 years for my dad and his presidential campaign, kind of as a
You were in your
payback.
late 20s? I'm trying to do
Early,
the math.
mid 26, 27. And kind of used credit cards to pay credit cards for a while, 2 little kids, and went to 45 states campaigning for my dad. And then I wanted to stick with it for the last 3 or 4 months, you know, in the general election. I think my views became solidified as a acolyte of Ronald Reagan. I mean, the guy was spectacular as a candidate and inspirational.
Did he treat you well? Was he nice to you?
Yeah. Oh, what a,
Did you have some talks with him, or
a little bit?
Saw him at events and
saw him at events, mostly, you know, the convention and a couple of the key events, like the one event, I think they did a rally in Dallas. We flew with the president after the convention to Peoria, because it plays in Peoria. You know, that's how if it plays in Peoria, it's a good thing. And there were my first experience of a huge crowd like that.
He was an Illinoisian.
Yeah, it was impressive. Then we went to Dallas for a big event, and I was hooked.
Now, your dad won the Iowa caucus, as I recall, in '80.
He did.
Was it a tough thing for you? Well, dumb question. Of course it was. How tough was it when he lost the nomination as the candidate's son?
You know,
it's a long time ago, I know.
It was tough, but not. It was. He did everything he could. He worked till the end. I remember campaigning in Oregon in May, and he was still in the race, believe it or not. But now, you know, these things end in March or February. He was fighting for the Oregon and Michigan primaries in late May. Maybe he stuck in too long, but my dad is a determined, tenacious guy, and I thought my dad would have been a better partner with President Reagan. But I'm not very objective about that.
Did you think that ticket would win in 1980? Reagan Bush would win?
I did. I did. The country was in really tough times, and the president was offering I think he lifted more than just the 5-point plans, you know, which I have a tendency in politics to migrate to, you know, detailed policy. The president lifted the spirits of the country, lifted the cloud over our country, which, you know, we need now. We really kind of need it now. Our country is in a deep funk. I mean, the numbers that when people self-describe how they feel about the future, and I saw a poll last week, CNN poll, that 49% of the American people believe that we're heading to a depression worse than the Great Depression. Now, there are 2 things come to mind on that. One, Americans have a very little sense of history, because the Great Depression was
an unbelievably brutal thing.
Brutal, and no social welfare net around the American people as there is today. And two, that's a really, I think, a telling indicator of how deeply pessimistic people are. And part of politics, I think, is to lift people's spirits up and to change their thinking so that they can be part of the solution. And that's what Ronald Reagan did as a candidate and certainly as president almost immediately.
It must have felt good to see your father win the president's first nomination in the presidency in '88.
Yeah, it was something else.
But what's it like to be I was thinking what it's like to be the president's son, and I know what it's like to be the coach's son. You hear some rotten things about him in the bleachers and so on. It's not easy. And was it tough?
It was.
Did you live and die with every move and every criticism?
At first, particularly for, I mean, both my brother and my dad, it's hard to see them in a, you know, I know who they are, and to see how they were pummeled, it's hard. So, but you get used to it. You just gotta be careful. And I was pretty good at that. I got better at it as I went along. So, you know, it's different for sure. You get a front row seat for some spectacular things. It's like going to watch whatever your favorite sport is and have the best seat in the house. And then you have all of the pains of kind of vicariously living with the personal side of it. Now, you know, a lot of sons and daughters of famous people get psychologically impaired by it. You know, not just presidents, but movie stars, you know, the whole work. I mean, they freak out, they can't handle it. I had an epiphany when I was in my mid to late 20s where I realized, in my mind, my dad is the greatest man I've ever met or ever will meet, in the broadest sense of the word, in terms of honor, just virtue. There is no one like him. And it's hard to be the son of someone who's near perfect. And so and I'm goal-driven and very determined, and so I figured I kind of benchmarked myself to half of him. And that worked. It's worked ever since. It's allowed me to be who I am and not over-fret about getting to some benchmark that's near impossible.
I remember something your mother said. It was an amazing statement for a mother to make. She said, my boys, 4 boys, right? Mm-hmm. Very handsome fellows, but nothing like their father. that was loyal in a way.
It's true.
In '92, there's a loss to Clinton. Do you know Clinton, sort of?
A little bit. I've met him now that he's become kind of an extended part of our family, thanks to the relationship that is sincere. It's a really good relationship with my dad. I've had a hard time with that. I've gotten comfortable with it now, but I think the only time I've ever hurt my dad's feelings that I can recall was when I made some wise remark about President Clinton, and it hurt my dad's feelings. You know, at the age of 75, you don't want to be doing that. You know, President Clinton, I think, has had a good post-presidency.
Yeah.
I think he's
a PR master.
He's done good things, and he's got great political skills to maybe enhance them even more than the reality of them. But he's stayed involved in a good way, and so I've grown to respect him a little bit more and appreciate his service more than when he was president, which I had a hard time with.
Not just you. Do you know Carter at all? Did you ever?
I've met him on a habitat build here in Miami many years ago. I've seen him at events where presidents gather.
Yeah, right.
I don't have the same warm feeling for President Carter because he's expressed his lack of warm feelings for both my brother and my dad.
Sure.
And again, I'm not here to try to be objective about these things. Blood's thicker than water.
He's not always a warm, cuddly Sunday school teacher.
No, I think one of the things, you know, I lost a race that was a bitter, close election, and
I'll bring that up next.
It was not a fun thing. But you quickly, either you worry about it and you fret about it and you say, "Oh, woe is me, it's not fair," and kind of whine about it, or you move on.
Yeah.
And I learned from my dad. You move on. You go to the next thing. You learn from it. I think President Carter may not have ever kind of gotten over the '80 election, where he felt like he had earned the right for re-election. He was beaten by an incredible guy, and just seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it
he
just
was
seems
beaten
like
by someone Carter thought vastly his inferior.
losing's hard, you know.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing. It's better to win.
Yeah.
But if you make it into a learning experience, it actually is the best way to learn and to grow and to improve. You don't learn from your your successes. You learn from your failures, and you accept responsibility and adjust and move on. And that's a lesson I learned from my dad, I think, more than just watching him. And perhaps if President Carter had learned that lesson from my dad, he might be a happier man today. I don't know.
Let's talk about '94 a little. And you ran against Lawton Chiles.
Yep.
He was a senator and a governor at the time. You ran for
Right.
governor. And he was a good politician, wasn't he?
He was a unique politician.
He was canny.
He never lost a race, so he was pretty darn good in that regard. He was he connected well with people, really well, in a really unique way.
He would walk the state, wouldn't he? They called him
He
Walking
did.
Lawton.
His first election, he walked the state and garnered lots of attention. And he was one of those icons that well, he never lost. So
How
you
close
got to
was the
respect
race?
that.
I don't recall.
It was real close. It was
Yeah.
like 48,000 votes in a 4 million cast. So it was, at the time, it was the closest election in Florida gubernatorial history.
Did it make you want to, did you feel you wanted to run again after, or did you think for a while, I'm done? You know?
I wanted to, I didn't know. I didn't know if it was going to be right for me and my family. I wanted to stay involved enough so as to make it easier to run. In other words, I didn't want to like go away and sulk. I wanted to go back to my business, but also stay involved. So, and the decision to run really kind of happened in, I'm trying to remember now, to run again would have been mid-97. I really made it an all-in decision. But in the interim, I took the time to think about what I could do better as a candidate, and I took the time to learn about things. I mean, I believe that lifelong learning is kind of an important part of life, that it brings great joy, and you just, to think you've got it all figured out is the day you think you have it figured out is the first day of your demise. I mean, life just doesn't work that way. So I took the time to put a human context on my ideology, if you will, and I created a foundation that tried to be a do tank to act on things. So we created the first charter school in the state with the Urban League of Greater Miami. I don't recommend setting up a charter school from a standing start of nothing. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but we did it. And we did other things. And so from that, it gave me a better perspective to be a candidate. So when I ran in 94, I was just like a fire, you know, it was a good year to have a hard edge, and
Yeah, right.
and I had it. I was, and I said what I believed, and what I believed was unvarnished conservative views, but I didn't share enough with people who I was. It was all about ideas, and not enough about who was actually going to lead.
So you had had a trial run in '94, and you were readier in '98. I assume.
I wouldn't recommend that either, because it was 2 years of the greatest experience of my life. But you know, I would have rather won.
Yeah.
So when I did get a chance to do it again, instead of just saying I'm for X, Y, and Z for education, I went to visit 250 schools, and so I could put a human context on my beliefs. I could tell stories that connected me to the frustrations of people inside the system, or the aspirations of young people that were not having their aspirations fulfilled, or kind of the callous nature of a bureaucrat inside the system. It was a much better, I became a better storyteller.
Conservative candidates are traditionally called anti-black, anti-poor, anti-environment, and so on.
Yeah.
I'm sure you faced that. Those charges haven't seemed to stick much to you. You're kind of aggressive about them. How do you handle them?
Well, I mean, in Florida, I eliminated affirmative action by decree, by executive order. Race cannot be used even today, as a criteria for admissions into our universities. Yet we have more African Americans attending our universities, both nominally and proportionally, I think, than before I signed the executive order. Same with procurement. I appointed more African Americans and Hispanics and women to the judiciary and to my administration. They happen to be conservatives, you know, so.
You cared about what they thought.
Yeah, and so it just became, embracing diversity in the right way was showed that there wasn't, you know, these ideas of being anti-anything was really not what I was about. And
is it hard? I think it's hard to make a case for free market policies or classical liberal policies on a campaign trail. And I've seen people mess it up time after time. The bigger government people, it seems to me they have better rhetoric about solidarity and inclusion and protection and so on.
Yeah,
and the rhetoric of entrepreneurship is not nearly as, doesn't seem to be nearly as snappy or as attractive to people.
I would argue that it hasn't been tried enough recently. I would say that we've lost we haven't talked about free market, little L liberalism in a way that draws people towards conservative candidates. I think it's, you know, we get into, as conservatives, we get into kind of the green eye shade, eat your broccoli messages, which, you know, it's just, it's harder, it's a much harder sell.
Some Bushes don't like broccoli very much, that I remember.
Well, after he liberated us, we all could express our views on that. But it's a different, it's a harder message just to say we have to live within our means, you know, kind of like this, than it is to say, come and I'll protect you, which is the message of the left. It's a false security, but it is, in times of anxiety and change, it's a very compelling, easier message to make. So I think the successful conservative candidate running nationally needs to make the case that our children and grandchildren are going to pay a heavy price, and we have a responsibility to get our act together, live within our means, make the story about them, not about the sacrifice that people have to make, and then say the way this will be easier is to embrace the things that got us to our greatness. And one of those clearly is entrepreneurial capitalism. The ability for people to invest in their dreams and work hard and create huge wealth for themselves and for the people associated with them, and great prosperity for larger numbers of people. And that dynamic kind of nature is far better than getting in line, basically, and accepting a ceiling on your aspirations. It's a harder message, perhaps, but it's the only one we got, and it's the one that needs to be said, because you can't, in the world today, I don't think you can, you have to say what you're going to do in order to have the big things get done. You can't just ignore the changes that are necessary. And the embrace of capitalism may have risks associated with it, but it yields, if you're fortunate enough to get elected, I think, the chance to act on that kind of philosophy that would be great for our country.
A couple of times I had the privilege of interviewing or moderating panels with Milton Friedman, and we talked about education policy.
Yeah.
And vouchers and various reforms. And we said, you know, they're no-brainers. They should be easily sellable by politicians to the public, because we have such a persuasive case. And yet education reform is so hard in the political sphere. Do you agree with that? Why?
Well, I can only tell you that there have been, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 cases around the country of ballot initiatives for broad voucher proposals. California, Utah, I believe, and a couple other states. And they have been, in Michigan, I think, had one as well. And they've been soundly rejected by 3-1, you know, for a couple of reasons. One, the argument is you're destroying public education, and there's this kind of idyllic notion that the Horace Mann...
It's a civic religion.
It is, and it's a unifying force for all of us to be able to be Americans and share values and things. And that's not what education is today, but that still persists.
Romance.
And then it's, when you're trying to change something, the people that are threatened typically by, you know, exert energy probably 10 to 1 greater than those that passively support you, but the opposition is always much more energetic. So in the case of Utah, I think it was like a 20-to-1 funding disadvantage. And the destruction of public schools combined with the demonizing of the people that were organizing the effort is the kind of thing that makes it hard to win. So the successful places where there's been opening for school choice has been done by executive leadership and by the legislature.
Maybe this is self-flattering to conservatives, but I've heard some conservatives say the reason these initiatives fail is that people really are conservative in temperament, and they see school reform as a change, and maybe an abrupt change, and they'd rather stick with the status quo, which is conservative in a way.
It is.
Not our kind of conservative, but it's a type of temperamental or psychological conservatism.
Yeah, and I think education reform to be successful has to be taken out of the political context. I mean, think about it. Who are the beneficiaries of school choice? Those that have no choice today. Those are typically lower income, which disproportionately vote Democrat. But yet the constituencies that defend the system are the Democratic core, the adults are the Democratic, huge constituency inside the Democratic apparatus. And so our constituencies are passive about this issue because they think their schools are okay or their kids go to private school. And so we have this kind of weird situation where there isn't, the interests aren't aligned the right way. And so I think to be successful, you need to get this out of ideology. And so you've got to create coalitions around these ideas that are less ideological to be successful. The voucher idea started in the 60s. Of course, the same time Milton Friedman began to argue eloquently for a voucher system for public education, the left was advocating it as well. The strongest support for vouchers in the 60s came from the same people that were advocating massive government involvement in all sorts of things. This was a question of social justice. And so there is a coalition, it just hasn't been worked the way it needs to be worked.
You're pro-life, anti-abortion.
Yes.
Some people think that's an albatross around a politician's neck or on a Republican Party's neck. It's not.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean...
Is that something that... Some people are pro-life, they shut up about it, at least in politics. They sort of murmur when they have to. But you...
or they're pro-choice and they feel compelled to be pro-life because they're running. And they're uncomfortable about it, rather than think it through. I'm pro-life because I believe that this is a divine inspiration. It's not about us, it's a God-given right.
You mean life itself?
Yeah, life itself. And I view the life issue from a broader context than just a child in a mama's womb. But I think we need to be respectful of life from the beginning all the way to the end to respect God's wishes. So it's a view based on faith, but I'm very comfortable with it, and I think you can make a loving case for it, a compassionate, loving case for life, rather than, it's another good example of how politics tarnishes important subjects. So I'm disappointed when candidates don't think it through, haven't really thought it through in the way that they should, run from their views if they have a view, or shift their views to a view more like mine because they feel compelled to. I think this should be people who've thought it through, who have a compass that points north, and whether you agree with them or not is not as important in my mind as what's in their heart, and are they convicted to their beliefs, and are they going to stick by them, and because that leads to a bunch of other positive things in terms of leadership. So I've never shied away from the issue. I think I got better as I went along about how to describe it, so wasn't being judgmental, but and then I acted on it. As a governor, I had a chance to act on my beliefs, which was what a joy.
And it didn't hurt you politically?
Not that I could tell.
Let's do a little more campaigning. 2000, November 2000, December 2000, and it's Vice President Al Gore versus Governor George W. Bush. And it all comes down to this great dispute in Florida. And of all states, of all the 50 states,
you can't make it up, Jay.
Florida, when the brother of the Republican nominee was the governor of the state, that must have been, tell me about that.
Well, it started at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Austin, Texas, where the family gathered at about 5 o'clock Central Time for an early dinner. The whole family, the extended family that came to celebrate George's election. And by 6 o'clock Central Standard Time, one of these crazy guys like Tom Brokaw or somebody, not that they're crazy, but
I gotcha. Yeah.
They said, we have a, 7:01, Florida's for Gore. And I started crying because I was the chairman of my brother's campaign, and I couldn't believe it. I thought we were going to win Florida. I thought it was going to be a close election. Resources were just plowed in there. And I hugged my brother and said, I'm really sorry. Because I thought, the authority from up above said it was over. And went to Donnie Evans and said, I'm going to start calling, give me some numbers, I'm going to start making talk radio calls and out in the Mountain and Pacific time states just to, to fight on, kind of to feel better about this. And so about an hour and a half later, Karl Rove calls me and says, you can come back down now. They've undone their
prediction,
call.
Their call. Uh-huh.
And so we went over to the governor's mansion, and it just would have, you can't make it up. I mean, it was the strangest thing in the world. And then we left, my wife and I went back to Tallahassee like at 4 in the morning, and 5 in the morning we arrived in Tallahassee, and the Gore-Lieberman campaign plane was already landed in Tallahassee with all their lawyers. So I was like under siege as governor. I recused myself from many of the ministerial elements of my job that I could as the campaign manager, and tried to do my job. It was weird.
Yeah.
We had like satellite trucks that I couldn't go out in public without getting just swamped, and it was hard to do my job, but I did the best I could, and I provided quiet advice, but wasn't actively involved in the goings on. I was just kind of back to the front row seat. I had a pretty good one, but.
Here's a funny question, but were you worried in a way that it would tip the Republican way? Because people would say, aha, it's Jeb.
Well, that's what people still to this day believe. There's a vast left-wing conspiracy about a lot of things, but this is probably at the top of the list, that the election was stolen by the younger brother. Which.
Were you surprised that the Republicans pulled it out, that it went the Republican way, the George W. Bush way?
All I knew was from the very beginning, my brother was ahead. Every count, in every fashion, he was always ahead.
Yeah.
And so I figured, well, if he just always stays ahead, eventually someone's going to call timeout and this thing's got to be over. We got to move on to the next thing, which is the candidate has to become president. And so that's what happened. And every count after the Supreme Court decision was made, the same thing happened. The Miami Herald did this incredibly complex process of counting votes in 3 or 4 different ways. And as I recall, every one of them showed that my brother won. So how many times do you have to win before you finally win? Yeah. That's kind of the question.
Which was more, let's say, challenging personally for you? When your dad was in the Oval Office, or when one of your brothers was in the Oval Office? Was it deja vu all over again, so to speak? And here we go.
Well, I was governor for part of that
Almost
time.
all of it.
Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah.
So
you had your own work to do.
I had my own work to do. Had my own duties to do. I was probably the most supportive governor of my brother's presidency. Probably. There were others that were equally loyal, but I was maybe the most visible. But I really focused on my job, and where there were disagreements, I was maybe more quiet than a typical governor would have been, but I fought for the interests of the state. And by the way, the President 43 and his administration treated Florida very well. I was happy about that.
I'll give you a little anecdote from the Oval Office. It's I think it's December 08, so it's the last month or so, month and a half of your brother's presidency, and a few of us are in there. We have an hour with him talking about things. And on the way out, people are talking about Jeb for Senate. That'd be the 2010 race. And he said, I really hope he runs, and he'd be great. It'd be good for Florida, it'd be good for him, it'd be good for the Republican Party, it'd be good for conservatism, he should really do it. And I think I kind of interrupted him, And I said, but you know, Jeb Bush, I said, you know, he's an executive personality. He ought to have an executive position. And the president kind of glared at me. And then his face changed expression, and he said, I agree with you. He said, he's really an executive type. Is that what you thought when it came down to whether to run for the Senate or not?
Yeah, I've had a couple of opportunities to consider it, maybe 3 since I've left, or what, 2000, I think
they keep coming
at least
out.
Twice, I don't know, maybe 3. And I've not done it because it's not the right time for me personally and for my family, and I have to achieve some degree of financial security for my family, and I've taken the years of that typically people are successful financially, I dedicated to aspiring to be governor and then being governor, which was a blast. So, but you know, it does. Time moves on. You got to accept the responsibilities and duties that you have. So that's the partial reason. But the other reason is that I look at the Senate, and I know a lot of the senators, and they're fine people, and they're really smart, and they're very talented, but it doesn't look like they do much. They do some things, but they don't lead. They don't. It's collegial rather than an executive job, as you said. I just feel I think I'd be like a fish out of water.
Well, on the topic of executive positions, before I came down here, I said to some people what I was doing. I'm going to Miami, interview Jeb, and I hang around a lot of conservatives, by the way.
Yeah, I know that.
And to a man, they said, convince him to run for president. Convince him, got to get him to run. Just about to a man. These weren't...
You don't hang out with women, apparently.
Oh, yeah, a fair amount. And that must be very flattering.
It is. It's incredibly flattering.
You know, there are a lot of people who aren't asked to run who run, and here you are, you're asked to run. You know,
yeah.
It's a flattering thing, I'm sure.
Very flattering. And it's beyond flattering. It's humbling. Now, having said that, it's also unfair to the candidates that are running. I think there's this expectation of perfection, looking for the next, you know, the perfect when we have the potential of the great in our midst already running, and I think the candidate, you know, the campaign will evolve and people will begin to see the attributes of some really fine men and women that are running.
You're familiar with the phenomenon of people who praise someone in one breath and put someone else down in the next breath, or the same breath.
All the time.
And I remember specifically when I was really following politics intensely. You know, I'm an adult political journalist now, right? And I'm supposed to know a lot. But when I was young, I really followed it intensely. It's kind of like sports or something. And I remember at the beginning of the Bush administration, 41 administration, the press was very favorable to Barbara Bush, the First Lady, very, very. They'd often say, what a wonderful First Lady, unlike, and then there'd be something negative about Nancy Reagan.
Right.
You know, I say, if you like her, you like her. You don't have to put someone else down. And I imagine you've heard, should have been Jeb instead of W. Should have been Jeb.
All the time. It's just annoying.
I was going to say, it must be, yeah.
It's very annoying, and people do this, maybe, you know, partially with good intentions, but basically not. I mean, there's a lot of that pushing down.
It's a way to dig at someone while...
Yeah, and my brother got the brunt of that. It got old real quick. It's just, I don't know why it is that we're in this, we live in a coarse time, and so our politics, which is a reflection of our culture, maybe a mirror image, but a circus mirror, so it's more exaggerated perhaps, but it's so common now to do that, to tear somebody down. And I was one of the props used to tear my brother down occasionally.
Let me put this in the most sophisticated technical economic terms I know. Are we going down the tubes?
No, we don't have to. If we keep doing what we're doing, it's not sustainable, and it'll create a time either where we'll have the choice to reverse our course, which is kind of moving towards the drain, if you will, or do it before then. which would be my hope, because the pain that will take place when you have hyperinflation, high interest rates, the adjustments that will be imposed on us from the rest of the world because we're living way beyond our means will be brutal. But I actually think there are things that could be done to reverse this course very quickly. And
what are they? What should we do?
Well, we need to embrace a version or the Ryan Plan, which is not as draconian as it's made out to be, because in Washington world, you're cutting the growth, and that's called a cut. Yeah. And they keep doing it like that's how we do it at our kitchen table. Like,
this is what the Reagan Bush White House got all the time, by the way.
Yeah,
they're cutting. They were trying to slow the rate of growth, they kept saying.
It's just nuts. I mean, is there a single kitchen table where mom and dad are trying to work on the family budget in America, where they're cutting the growth of their anticipated revenue or their anticipated expense? You know, they have a finite amount of money, and they make finite amounts of cuts to say for their child's education or for their vacation or for their insurance or whatever it is. But yet, so we frame this all the wrong way to make it look like it's some radical deal. It's not. The Ryan Plan, I think, is necessary. But the other element, which I think is really important, is to lay out a high growth economy. How can you create in a mature country, a developed country like the United States, how can a country like ours grow at 4% per year for 10 years? That's not ideological. Now, the policy changes necessary to make that happen may have an ideological framework. You would clearly reform our tax system, which would create a burst of dynamic activity in the economy.
How should we do that?
Eliminate as many of the deductions and credits and all of the get in line kind of tax policy that gives power to politicians, and lower rates. I think the idea of Palenti's idea of eliminating the capital gains rate or dramatically lowering it is those kind of ideas promote investment in our country. Secondly, we need a domestic energy policy that would create a huge burst of economic activity. We spend $400 billion a year net going out to places that where there's not any economic activity attached to it. I mean, no investment, no jobs created in our country because we are dependent on foreign oil when we have more resources, more natural gas and oil resources perhaps than any country in the world today. But yet we're like Rome at the end of the empire, where the Romans probably went and sought resources from the furthest part of their empire at the highest cost with huge security implications rather than trying to develop resources closer in. We're doing the same thing, and it's just boneheaded. It is just ridiculous.
What stops us? Is it merely the power of the environmental left that keeps us from doing it, or do ordinary people oppose exploration?
No, ordinary people don't oppose this stuff. I think you need to be led. I think we need to be led. We need to have the convergence of ideas and a plan created that is part of the revival of our nation. I mean, these are big challenges we face, and political leaders can't be talking about a green job that's subsidized by the government as a national strategy for energy security and for economic growth. Now, the third element of a high growth agenda, which is a little more controversial in conservative circles, is getting our act together as it relates to immigration, controlling our border, and then advancing the one thing that if we were a business, if the country was a business and you wanted to compete and grow, you would deal with the things that you were not competitive in and become more competitive, right? And you would take advantage of the unique strengths of the country or of the business. In our case, we're the only country of any scale that can absorb people from all around the world, the contract basically is you share our American values and we allow you to pursue your dreams in our country. And we do it in a way that just creates a dynamic, vibrant society. It's been that way, with ebbs and flows since the 19th century. It's who we are. It's in our DNA. It's it's ridiculous to try to be competitive in an increasingly competitive world and not take advantage of the unique strengths of our country. So the Bush plan would be control the border, do what great countries need to do, which is for security purposes, control your border, but then recognize that if we're going to grow at 4% per year, we have to have young, aspiring people be able to create that dynamic activity. And we can't do it with our existing demographics. We have to bring people in that want to pursue their dreams in our country. And it ought to be robust. I mean, I say everybody with a PhD that isn't going to want to blow up our country and believes in American values, they're in. Anybody that wants to work hard, that shares our values, learns English, they're in. And I think that would be a catalytic converter for growth. So those three things, they're not really ideological. Energy security, an immigration policy that's forward-leaning, that's true to our values, and tax simplification, along with the eat your broccoli, lower, live within your means. We would be back to the road of greatness, I think, if we did that.
Is Social Security reform impossible? Is it still the third rail?
No, it's got to be done. I'll never forget, I was traipsing around the country somewhere on a Sunday, kind of grumpy that I wasn't at home. And I was watching Marco Rubio debate Charlie Crist. This was before Governor Crist abandoned the party. And the question of Social Security came up. It was a Fox Sunday show. And Marco Rubio said with a straight face, with real conviction, said, of course we're going to have to change the eligibility age. Of course we're going to have to raise the retirement age and consider means testing Social Security. Just as a matter of fact.
And said it in a Florida race.
He said it in a Florida race, and I said, damn right. That's the Marco I know. And that was just the beginning of his great campaign. But so if he can do it, and he got attacked by Chris, kind of the standard, tired, old attack that, you're taking away grandma, like the throwing grandma the wheelchair off the cliff kind of deal. You have to persuade people with big ideas. Medicare reform and Social Security reform are essential for readjusting, the role of giving chance for the next generation to be successful. So you have to persuade. The bigger, the more controversial the idea, the more you have to persuade. You just can't just throw it out there and leave it. But it has to change.
Media bias used to be a big deal in our lives.
Yep.
Our political life. Is it your impression that has lessened some?
Absolutely. I mean, to a certain extent, it's allowed for the New York Times kind of media to have maybe even more influence because all of their other colleagues have died. So you have fewer voices that many others look at. Does that make sense? So if you watch the news, I watch. In the morning, I could end up watching either CNN or Fox and Friends or Morning Joe, just as an example, or the Squawk Box. Those would be the four, depending on how I feel, or ESPN. But on the news shows, those would be the four that I'd watch, and they get their news still, just like the old days, from the New York Times, maybe, or the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. So those three national papers. If they have a disproportionate say, but the voices that pick up that information and create their own views is just totally dispersed, which I think is very healthy. I mean, I get the National Review on my iPad. It's a spectacular. It's just so much. It's so easy to do, and it's great information. It nourishes my mind, and it's so convenient. And I have 5 other sources of information.
Music to my ears.
I mean, it's just the amount of good quality information that you can get. Now, it requires a little self-discipline to be able to filter out some of the crap, but that should be our responsibility anyway, right?
Yeah. Will we live to see the fall of the Castro dictatorship, or is that going to be forever and forever?
No, he'll die, and so will his brother. And I don't think the Castro brothers will open up their economy. I think if they showed any sign of willingness to change the relationship with Washington, the Obama administration would trip over themselves, incorrectly so in my mind, but nevertheless, they would trip over themselves to create formal relations with Cuba. But the fact is, they've done the opposite. They continue to repress. Political prisoners are dying in prison. And so the question is, what's next after the Castro brothers go to hell? And I think there's a chance then.
Almost all of my life I've heard and sometimes said, this is in a presidential campaign.
This is the most important election ever.
Every 4 years like clockwork.
This will be a really fascinating election because I think both sides will be really energized. And so we live in a divided country. No one has been able to persuade enough people to really make a sea change, you know, for a long period of time towards one direction. And hopefully this year we'll be able to convince people that individual freedom and liberty, kind of the linchpin of a successful society and a virtuous society, is the way to go, rather than to all kind of get in line for the security of more government.
Great to talk to you. We could go on and on.
Thanks, Jay.
So good to see you. Thanks a million.
You bet.
I'm Jay Nordlinger with the Human Parade. We've been talking with Jeb Bush, once the governor of Florida, and later, who knows? Thank you all. Governor, really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Jay.